He was a hard-working landlord, a father, a man who believed in second chances. For years, Vasudeva Kethireddy had built a life helping people, renting apartments to those who needed a place to stay, giving people a roof over their heads even when they struggled to pay. He was the kind of man who answered calls late at night, who showed up when a tenant had a problem. And on one October evening, that kindness led him straight into a death trap. It started with a simple call, a leak, an apartment in need of repairs, a request for help. Like always, he went. No hesitation, no second guessing. He walked into the apartment, and he never walked out. Hours passed, then days. His phone stopped ringing. His family waited for him to come home, but he never did. For nearly 2 months there was no trace of him, no sign of where he had gone. Then, someone noticed a smell. A sewer, dark and deep beneath the city streets. A place where no one was supposed to look. But inside, something was there. The stench was overwhelming. A sickening, rotting odor. And when detectives lifted the heavy grate, they saw what had been hidden in the darkness. A human body. Decayed. Unrecognizable. Someone had thrown him away. Like garbage. Like he never mattered. But they were wrong. Because now, the police were watching. Now, the truth was about to rise from the shadows. Who would do this? What? And how did they think they'd get away with it? Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers, and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. He wasn't just a name in a news report. He was a father, a friend, a man who had everything to live for. But in his final moments, trapped inside that apartment, surrounded by 2 men who had lured him into their web, did he realize the truth? Did he know that he was never going to walk out? Vasudeva Kethireddy was a man who believed in hard work. He built everything he had from the ground up. Born in India, he grew up knowing the value of sacrifice. He worked his way through school, studied engineering, and built a life for himself in America. But he wasn't just a landlord. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a father, a husband, a friend. And above all, he was a man who cared. He rented out apartments, but he didn't see his tenants as just names on a lease. He saw them as people. People who sometimes needed help. When tenants fell behind on rent, he gave them time. When they had problems, he listened. And when someone called him about a leak, he showed up. Because that's the kind of man he was. But on that day, the kindness that defined him would also be the thing that led him straight into danger. It was supposed to be a routine visit. Just another day of work. Just another problem to fix. But as he walked through that apartment door, did he sense something was off? Did he hear the door click shut behind him and feel the walls closing in? Did he look into the eyes of the men standing before him and realize, too late, that he wasn't getting out? Because the truth was, Vasudeva Kethireddy didn't walk into an apartment that day. He walked into a trap. And the men waiting inside had already decided his fate. Elijah and Tony Green. 2 brothers. They weren't just tenants. They were men running out of options. They had no jobs. No money. No future. They owed back rent. They knew an eviction notice was coming. And when they looked at Vasudeva Kethireddy, they didn't see a man who had helped them. They saw a way out. They made a plan. A simple one. A call, a lie, a chance to lure him in. A fake leak. Just enough to make him come. Just enough to get him through the door. Because once he was inside, he wasn't coming out. The call was made. Come. Polite. Just another tenant reporting a problem. And like always, Vasudeva answered. No hesitation. No suspicion. He grabbed his tools. Drove over. Walked up the stairs. Knocked on the door. The brothers were waiting. The trap was set. The door opened. He stepped inside. And within minutes, his fate was sealed. Did he feel it then? Did something shift in the air? Did he notice the way the brothers looked at him? Did he sense that this wasn't about a leak? That this wasn't a simple visit? That the 2 men standing in front of him weren't just struggling tenants anymore? They were predators. And he was their prey. The door clicked shut. No one heard a scream. No one heard a fight. Because inside that apartment, a landlord was being turned into a victim. How do 2 young men overpower a 76-year-old man? They waited. They let him step inside. Let him feel safe. Let him believe this was just another day. And when the moment was right, they struck. Maybe he turned his back for just a second. Maybe he reached for his tools. And that's when they grabbed him. One wrapped his arms around Kethireddy's throat. Tight. Unrelenting. The other held him down, pressing, crushing, making sure he couldn't fight back. He struggled. His body twisted, desperate for air. His hands clawed at their arms. But he was outnumbered, outmatched. His strength faded. His body went limp. And then, silence. No more struggling. No more gasping. No more life. Vasudeva Kethireddy, landlord, father, man of kindness, was gone. And for what? For $1,600 in cash. For credit cards they thought they could use. For a quick payday that would never be enough. They searched his pockets. Took everything they could. His wallet. His phone. Anything of value. But now, they had a bigger problem. A dead body in their apartment. A crime scene they couldn't just walk away from. And a single question hanging over them like a noose. How do you get rid of a man, like he was never there? The clock was ticking. The body couldn't stay. So the brothers made their next move. A move that would lead them deep into the city's underground, where the stench of death would rise long before the truth. The apartment was silent. The struggle was over. The body lay still. But the problem had just begun. Elijah and Tony Green stood over Vasudeva Kethireddy's lifeless body. And for the first time, reality hit them. They had killed him. There was no taking it back. No undoing what they had done. Now they had a dead man in their apartment. And they needed to get rid of him, fast. Panic set in. They paced, whispered. Their hands shook. Their clothes smelled like sweat and fear. And then, they turned to the one place desperate criminals always go. Google. They typed the words like it was just another search. How to decompose a body in a sewer. They scrolled, clicked, looked for an answer, a way out, a way to make him vanish. Because they thought if there was no body, there was no crime. They grabbed what they could. Sheets, plastic, anything to wrap him up. His body was heavy. Dead weight. Harder to move than they thought. They dragged him across the floor. His head hit the ground with a sickening thud. They didn't stop. They carried him through the apartment. Out the door. Down the stairs. Each step was slower than the last. Every sound made their hearts pound. The street was dark. The city still. They moved like shadows, hauling him through the night. Until they reached it. The sewer on 77th Street. A deep, gaping hole in the earth. A place where things go in, and never come back out. They lifted the grate. It was heavy. Rusted. Their muscles burned, but they had no choice. One final look. Then, they dropped him. His body disappeared into the blackness. A hollow splash echoed from below. And just like that, Vasudeva Kethireddy was gone. The brothers exhaled. Their hands still trembled. But it was over. Or so they thought. Because a body doesn't just disappear. It rots. It decays. It sends a message into the air. And soon, the truth started creeping to the surface. Days passed. Then weeks. And Vasudeva Kethireddy was still missing. His phone went silent. His tenants hadn't heard from him. Rent checks weren't being collected. His family called. Over and over. Voicemail. No response. Something was wrong. Kethireddy wasn't the kind of man who just disappeared. His son reported him missing. His friends asked questions. And soon, the police got involved. They started with the basics. His last phone calls. His last known location. And one address kept coming up. The Green brothers' apartment. Detectives knocked. Elijah and Tony answered, their faces calm, their voices steady. No, they hadn't seen him. No, they didn't know where he was. Lie after lie after lie. But the police weren't buying it. Because Vasudeva Kethireddy wasn't the kind of man who just vanished. And then, a breakthrough. His bank account was still active. His credit cards were being used. Someone was spending his money. Detectives pulled the records. Gas stations. Convenience stores. A liquor shop on the corner of 81st Street. Surveillance cameras. Footage. And there they were. Elijah and Tony Green. Swiping stolen credit cards. Carrying shopping bags filled with things they could never afford. They thought they were in the clear. They thought no one would notice. But the police noticed. And then, another mistake. A digital trail they had forgotten about. Their phones. Their search history. Detectives pulled the records. Opened the browser. And there it was. How to decompose a body in a sewer. Cold. Calculated. Typed in their own words. From their own devices. They didn't just kill him. They planned how to make him disappear. But now the truth was out. The walls were closing in. And what they thought was buried, was about to come crawling back into the light. It started with a complaint. People in the neighborhood had noticed it, a smell. Foul. Heavy. Something that clung to the air. It wasn't just garbage. It wasn't just sewage. It was worse. The kind of smell that made people cover their faces. The kind that made stomachs turn. Someone called the city. A crew was sent out. They followed the stench, walking block by block. And then, they stopped. A sewer grate. Rusted. But something wasn't right. The smell was strongest here. A worker pulled out his tools. Lifted the grate. A gust of putrid air rushed upward, thick and nauseating. And then they saw it. Deep below, tangled in the filth, in the darkness. Human remains. The body was bloated. Unrecognizable. Weeks of decay had stripped it of features. But detectives already knew. They had been searching for Vasudeva Kethireddy. And now, they had found him. It took forensic testing to confirm what everyone already feared. DNA. Dental records. Anything that could prove the truth. But in the end there was no doubt. It was him. The kind landlord. The hard-working man. The victim. His body had been rotting in the dark, but his killers had been living free. Until now. Detectives moved fast. They didn't wait. They didn't hesitate. They went straight to the Green brothers' apartment. Knocked on the door. Elijah and Tony answered. Their faces dropped. The moment they saw the badges they knew. It was over. The handcuffs snapped around their wrists. They didn't fight. Didn't run. Didn't say a word. Because there was nothing left to say. They were taken downtown. Sat in an interrogation room. And for a while, it was silent. No yelling. No pleading. Just two brothers staring at the walls. And then, as the weight of what they had done crashed down on them, they talked. They spilled everything. The fake leak. The ambush. The strangulation. The robbery. How they dragged his body through the night. How they threw him away like garbage. Every chilling detail. They thought they could hide the truth. They thought the sewer would keep their secret. But the truth always comes back. And now there was only one thing left. Justice. August 2024. The courtroom was packed. Family. Friends. Strangers who had followed the case. Grief hung in the air. Anger burned in the eyes of those who had loved Vasudeva Kethireddy. And at the front of it all, Elijah and Tony Green. Dressed in orange jumpsuits. Shackled at the wrists. No longer in control. No longer free. This wasn't a trial about mystery. There were no questions left. Everyone knew what they had done. This was about justice. The prosecution didn't hold back. They painted the picture in brutal detail. A fake call about a leak. A landlord who trusted his tenants. A man who walked into an apartment and never walked out. A murder that wasn't impulsive, but planned. Cold. Calculated. And all for what? $1,600 in cash. Stolen credit cards. A desperate attempt to escape poverty by taking a life. The defense tried to argue. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't meant to happen. But the evidence was clear. The internet searches. The surveillance footage. The confession. There was no sympathy. No mercy. The jury didn't take long. February 2025. The judge called for silence. The courtroom held its breath. And then, the sentence. Elijah Green, 47 years in prison. Tony Green, 45 years in prison. No chance of freedom. No second chances. They will grow old behind bars. They will die behind bars. Vasudeva Kethireddy's family held each other. Some cried. Some just sat there, silent, staring at the two men who had taken everything from them. Justice had been served. But it didn't bring him back. It never does. Because in the end, a good man was still gone. And two brothers had thrown away their lives for nothing. Vasudeva Kethireddy was the kind of man who believed in people. He had spent his life building something. His career, his properties, his relationships. And when tenants struggled, he didn't just evict them. He gave second chances. They were his tenants. But sometimes, kindness is mistaken for weakness. He had helped. And sometimes, in return, trusting the wrong as an easy cost you everything. A way to make the Green brothers weren't strangers. A problem to get rid of. They weren't masked intruders or nameless killers. The question that lingers, the question that haunts everyone who followed this case. Was this always the plan? Did Elijah and Tony Green plot this for weeks? Were they always waiting for the right moment? Or was it a sudden decision? Did they wake up that morning as two struggling brothers, then decide in one horrifying moment to become killers? We'll never know. But one thing is certain, they believed they could get away with it. They thought if they cleaned up fast enough, if they hid the body deep enough, if they played it cool, they could slip through the cracks. But in the modern world, no crime goes unseen. They left a trail. A digital footprint, search histories, transactions, surveillance footage. Their secrets buried in algorithms, waiting to be uncovered. And when detectives followed the clues, it led them straight to the truth. Because in the end, you can't erase a crime. You can't undo a murder. And you can't silence the past forever. Vasudeva Kethireddy's story didn't end the night he walked into that apartment. His name is still spoken. His memory still alive. And the lesson he leaves behind? Trust, but be careful. Because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones waiting in the dark. A quiet street. Empty. Forgotten. But beneath it, a secret still lingers. The sewer where Vasudeva Kethireddy was found still flows. Dark water. Endless. Silent. A place meant to carry away the city's waste. Instead, it became a tomb. A silent witness to a murder that never should have happened. The kind of place that swallows the truth, until the truth fights its way back to the surface. For weeks his body was hidden there. For weeks the Green brothers lived their lives as if nothing had happened. But no matter how deep they buried the crime, the past always finds a way back. The sewer doesn't talk. It doesn't accuse. But it remembers. And long after the trial, long after the headlines fade, long after the Green brothers live out their prison sentences, that sewer will still be there. Still holding its dark secrets. Still whispering a warning. That sometimes, the deadliest traps are the ones you never see coming.